Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Nerd Marketing Podcast. My name is Drew Sanaki. Today, Mike and I talk about the Super Bowl and who from DTC would have played really well in the Super Bowl. We talk about how CMOs and CFOs have to just get along really well and how they can get along and just play nice together in the sandbox. And then we talk about apparel brands. We talk about why apparel in particular is able to really scale up direct mail channels, things like brands like Vuori and Buck Mason and Marine Layer. These are brands that just spend millions a year on direct mail, and it all leads to customer acquisition. There are 3 secrets that they're all embracing, and we dig into that. So I hope you enjoy today's podcast. So Mike, how you doing?
Good, Drew. You watched the game this weekend?
Did watch the big game. Did you have a rooting interest?
Not really. I know you were protecting the Pats' legacy, so had to go Eagles, right?
Yeah, to preserve the Pats, to preserve Brady's legacy, you got to root against Kansas City. So that was my rooting interest. But it was an entertaining game. If you weren't rooting for Kansas City, I mean, I enjoyed just seeing them get the snot beat out of them.
I enjoyed seeing Hexclad's commercial. I enjoyed, a couple other DTC brand commercials.
Wasn't Hims in there too?
Yeah, Hexclad and Hims were the big ones.
Yeah, so it got me thinking, 2 things on the Super Bowl. The first was, do you follow Daniel McCarthy?
No.
So he's comes out of like that Peter Fader customer lifetime value think tank.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah. So he had some interesting analysis that high level, most of the ads were he argues, to existing customers of these brands. It's not new customer acquisition. So only 13 of the 57 advertisers were from brands launched within the past 10 years. So because of this, most advertisers were looking to reinforce their image with their existing base versus using the Super Bowl as an opportunity to gain exposure, which is weird because of the exposure, because it's so big. So he argues more for customer development, maintaining awareness with the base, than for get them in at the top of the acquisition funnel.
Interesting. Sort of consistent with our boy Byron Sharp. Mm-hmm. How brands grow, keeping that brand saliency high, right? So,
and I love that we call him our boy in this podcast. I mean, never talked to the guy.
We got a lot. Yeah, we got a lot of those guys. We don't know they're our boys.
He's over in Australia. So these are all, the GoDaddies, the Salesforces, the Doritos, the Taco Bells, and what else we got in here? Netflix, Disney. These brands have all been around for a while, and I guess in that 13 advertisers that were launched more recently, there would be our boys at Hexclad, right? At Hims, companies like that. So, it's NerdWallet, Hims, Poppy. Poppy had an ad, another sort of D2C brand, CPG, Liquid Death, big one, Hexclad, FanDuel, Instacart, OpenAI, Tubi, Fetch Rewards on running. All right. So, if you're going to do the Super Bowl ad, you do it for customer retention. I thought that was interesting. Good analysis from our boy, Daniel McCarthy.
Yeah. You know what else would be fun, Drew, is if we were to match a player from the game to someone from the D2C Twitter universe.
Yeah, we got our picks here of who from these NFL teams are best the embodiment of certain personalities in D2C.
Yeah, so who are you thinking for the MVP, Jalen Hurts?
So for him, I had Sean Frank. I think you got to go Sean Frank with Jalen Hurts, because Sean built this 9-figure brand, bootstrapped this 9-figure brand. He's always harping on how it's profitable. He's got leadership. He's humble. I read Jalen Hurts lives in like a $2,000 $2,000 a month apartment. He's a very like humble guy, just like the workman. You know, he's just like out there. He's not too cocky. He's not like like Deion Sanders kind of like Showtime, right? So
Yeah.
I would say Jalen Hurts is Sean Frank from Ridge.
Yeah, I mean, no question, he's one of the best shit posters there is on D2C Twitter. But he, I think in real life, really, humble guy.
Yeah, so we had him as Jalen Hurts, Saquon Barkley, running back. Who do you got for him?
I'm thinking Connor from Hexclad and probably Cam, but we'll say Connor's more active on D2C Twitter because man, Hexclad is like a freight train. They're just running over everybody. They're everywhere. They're in Costco. They're on the Super Bowl. Like they're all over Fox with the partnership with Gordon, and they're growing like crazy. I mean, they are just running people over.
Yeah,
and I think that's good for Saquon.
He was contained in the Super Bowl, though. Saquon. I don't know about Connor, but Saquon was.
You look at the whole season, and
yeah, all right, I'll give you that one.
He's a beast.
I'm thinking the next guy I got up, AJ Brown, who's like the star receiver for the Eagles. You know, he's like 6'5", 250 pounds, and like who is that big? Who dominates? You know, the middle of the field like that? Cody Plofker.
Yeah.
I think both, you know, as 6'5", 250-pound individuals, I would give it that one to Plofker.
Yeah, who is not 6'5" or 250 pounds. But I think the key is, you know, embodies the 6'5", 250-pound guy.
Sure, plays like a 6'5", 250-pound guy. And
totally.
you can't shut him down. You know,
exactly.
It's really hard to just put like a cornerback on Plofker and have him shut down. You know, he's still going to get open.
Totally. Exactly. Maybe coaches. Who do you got for Sirianni?
Sirianni, we had Taylor Holiday.
Yeah.
You know, because he's very analytical, apparently really into customer lifetime value, you know, and he's like running the numbers, putting the right players out there on the field that give him the edge, just like Taylor Holiday.
Yeah,
so calling plays.
I like that.
Yeah. With Andy Reid, I got to go with myself, largely because I can consume just an incredible amount of hamburgers or cheesesteaks, and you know, in a short period of time, as can Andy Reid.
Yeah.
So I'll go with myself.
Fumble Rooski.
Yeah. Plus, it'd be like mildly insulting to say anybody else out in D2C Twitter reminds us of Andy Reid. So I'll take that one. And I got one for you. I'm going to go with Pat Mahomes as Michael Epstein.
All right.
So, you know, because he totally balls out. You know, the guy's just like giving 110%. He's awesome. No question as to his talent. And yet is he starting to get old? Like he kind of like screwed up a little bit in the Super Bowl through, you know, tried to do a couple of his Mahomes throws and they didn't work. He like missed the receiver. Maybe his body's starting to break down a little bit.
Yeah, I could see I appreciate the reference to one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. And he proved he can still throw that perfect bomb in that fourth quarter. But I think much like Mahomes, he's probably waking up the next day in a lot of pain.
Yeah.
You know, like just physical pain. And
like 3 years ago when you were CMO at Auto Anything, I would say that was like peak Mahomes. You were just dishing them out, you know, doing the sidearm passes to dudes. And I think maybe now, have you lost a spring in your step or just kind of get a little old and sore the next day?
I think it's more just the physical after all that balling out. You know, I wake up with pain you can't explain because that's just just getting old.
I said I'm Andy Reid, so I'm like the least athletic dude out there.
We still got our razzle dazzle, but just, I think, aches and pains in the morning, I think is the key thing for both of those guys.
All right. You had two for Travis Kelce.
I had, I split up Jason and Travis.
Okay.
Obviously, Jason's not playing now, but I was just thinking of players and who embodies it. I got Eli for Jason. So okay. Eli Weiss, who's now at Yotpo, because Jason's so focused on loyalty. He was loyalty guy, Yotpo loyalty, but also culture guy. Really brought that culture and camaraderie to the Eagles. So I think of Eli when we think of that.
Yeah.
And for Travis, I got Rabba, our buddy Rabba from Vermont. He's got the flair. Rabba's got, the greatest shoe collection in D2C Twitter probably, but he's also got the skills to back it up. So that reminds me a lot of our friend Rabba.
Also, I don't know Rabba's relationship status, but Kelce dating Taylor Swift, did that have anything to, influence on why you picked Rabba?
I did. It crossed my mind, but I don't know his relationship status either. So I got nothing there. Maybe
subject for a future podcast.
Right.
Those are good picks. I think there are also rumors that Kelce was like showing off his hair throughout the Super Bowl. Do you notice this? He had like rumors that he had gone to Turkey and got a hair transplant because it was like this thick mane, where in the past never. Yeah. We'll have to ask Rabba about that.
Okay.
Right? Yeah, so that's who we got. D2C representing in the Super Bowl. Great to see everybody out there. These guys like Plofker and Connor just like giving it their all for the game. So, totally. We look forward to next season. And congrats to everybody who played out there in D2C Twitter. Hey, Mike, one of the things we get asked a lot is how businesses change when you take private equity money. And I think given our backgrounds as working at these D2C brands that also are owned by PE, I think one of the biggest differences is how the role of the CMO kind of changes. And you've really got to, in many ways, these private equity brands are driven by the CFO. They all have a strong CFO. They've got financial oriented boards, and the CMOs that win and sort of like stay around are the ones who work really well with the CFO.
Yeah, I think you're right. And brand takes money from private equity, and they're like, "This is awesome. I'm gonna go buy a bunch of ads. I'm going to go do this and that." But the private equity fund is first thing they're usually saying is, all right, we got to put a real CFO in place here because we need to have a strong understanding of the numbers. You need to have a strong understanding of the numbers. And CEO, CMO, you need to be joined at the hip with your head of finance function. Especially now that you've taken institutional capital.
Those are the exact words that Kingswood told us. I think when we were in the first week of running Auto Anything, was like, here, you got to go get a CFO, and that guy's got to be in your hip pocket, joined at the hip or something.
And his office or her office needs to be right next to you guys.
Right.
That's actually what we had. It was your office, CFO, my office, all.
Yeah, it was like right between us, and so he could just basically keep us focused on the next board meeting and on the reporting and everything that had to happen. So, it was a big learning for us. And one of the things I think people ask is like how the role of the CMO changes. And we came up with 4 or 5 different things that a CMO needs to do to improve the working relationship with the CFO. It's good career advice.
Totally. I think number one, speak the same language. So if you're the CMO and you're just talking reach and ROAS and impressions and have a totally different set of KPIs, and then the CFO is saying, I want contribution margin, I want first order profitability, I want CAC down to the penny and all that, like you're setting yourself up for a lot of conflict and a lot of difficult conversations that are going to continue.
Yeah. And I think like CMOs marketing has come a long way. If we look at versus when we started.
Totally.
And, 20 years ago, it was all about all those other metrics, reach and traffic and conversions. And that's about it. And I do see people talking now more about contribution margin and lifetime value and CAC to LTV ratios. But that'll be like music to the CFO's ears because that's kind of what they use to drive the financials.
Totally. And get an understanding of the types of reports they're building and start to sort of map your models and your KPIs around what they're reporting in their financials and what they're reporting up to the board. And that's going to help make these conversations go a lot smoother. But you also have to build that case to the CFO. Like you have to help get them to understand what the investment is that you're looking to make and why. And you might have different goals. You might have short-term goals, long-term goals. And you have to help educate that CFO as to what the plan is and how you're going to measure success, right?
Yeah. And I think one of the things that's our second way that the CMO can play better with the CFO. And it's realized that as the CMO, you want to take a lot of bets. You want to try different things. You want to go to shows or you want to try retail or, you want to try direct mail and realize that the more you present all these ideas as investments and it's like, hey, here's what we're going to spend. Here's what we expect to make on this investment. Here's the ROI on this investment. You're going to have a much easier time justifying those experiments, and you've got to postmortem them after the fact, get on the same page with the CFO. He or she is more likely to sign off on your budget if you present them with a strong argument that says, I think this is going to ROI in this amount of months. That's going to help you work really well with the CFO. Yeah.
And I think talking about that longer horizon for the return is really important, Drew, that you mentioned at the end there, because especially as you start to scale, and a ton of the brands that we work with are in this exact situation right now, is to scale, you've got to really move beyond direct response, short-term ROI on every marketing investment you make. In some cases, you're not going to be able to say, I'm going to make this content. I'm going to go to these different events, and I expect to be able to quantify the return and show a profitable return within 7 days of doing that thing. Like that doesn't scale, right? So helping getting on the same page with your CFO on, okay, we're going to make some of these longer term bets, especially on the brand equity side, especially on top of funnel. That's critical to growing your brand over time and scaling your brand. And it's also critical to driving down customer acquisition costs over time.
Yeah, because we talk about Preston at Chubby's all the time. And this is kind of the conversation I envision him having with his CFO, which is like, we've got to switch from direct response to more brand equity initiatives. And these are not things you're going to be able to measure in the next 7 days. But over the next 6 months to a year, they're really going to drive down our CAC.
Exactly. So getting on the same page with what your thesis is around measuring success of those initiatives over time is what's critical. It's okay that you can't measure direct response ROI over a short horizon, as long as you both are on the same page that, yeah, we're going to look at CAC over time. We're going to look at branded search impression volume over time. We're going to look at some of these other things to evaluate, are these marketing initiatives having a positive impact on the brand and helping us scale better?
Right. So the third thing we've got, which is really getting marketing involved in budgeting and forecasting. And this has always been sort of a challenge, I think, until we figured out a big unlock. But, CFO has his or her own way to budget and to forecast. And it's often very different from how the CMO does it. In my experience as a CMO, it was, we're just going to take every channel from last year and we're going to increase it 20% or 50% or something like that. It was very like, let's start with the channel and do this sort of bottoms up. the CFO doesn't understand that. There's no rationale behind it. In many ways, they're thinking about budgeting by department, and not by marketing channel. So I think getting on the same page is critical. And one thing that you and I have really leaned into is sort of this customer-driven forecast, right? Mm-hmm. Where we model out the number of customers acquired. I forgot where we got this. It might have been Peter Fader, but you're like the number of customers you're acquiring. And then we talk about those 3 revenue multipliers. So like the number of customers acquired, the total amount they spend, and then the amount that the frequency that they come back, some sort of retention metric in there. And using those 3 multipliers in the total number of customers acquired, pushing that out over the next year has been a very helpful way to model the business, because I find that CFOs can get on the same page then.
Totally. They get on the same page, and it gives the CMO a little more freedom and flexibility to execute and operate that way. Because the CFO, to your point, Drew, doesn't need to understand, I'm investing X dollars on SEO content to try and do, and this is the KPI. It's more like, we need to drive new customer acquisition. Here's one of the ways that we're going to invest to do that against our budget. If we see the customer numbers hitting our targets, we're succeeding. If not, maybe you've pivoted 3 times to try and drive that number already. And you don't have to get into the weeds on every tactical strategy that you're using for that. And there was one other trick that we did successfully when it came to budgeting and forecasting. And that was, we created high, medium, low, or sort of like base case, optimistic case, pessimistic case in our forecast, so that, again, you could sort of see how you were trending. It gave you a little more flexibility to look at how you were performing early in that quarter, or early in that year, and say, like, are we heading towards a base case? And have we already modeled out what that means to the business? If we're hitting our optimistic targets, maybe there's a different staffing plan. If we're hitting our pessimistic targets, that might be a very different staffing plan and investment plan. But having that thought out in advance, so you're not reacting all the time, is really helpful. And in some cases, we've also even put line items for asymmetric bets. So things that have the potential to really move the needle, we're not going to bake it into the forecast, but showing the board and your CFO, here are a couple things that we believe have the potential to be asymmetric bets, high upside. Getting visibility on those things and showing how they play out over time gets people kind of excited.
Yeah. Direct mail comes to mind. Retail distribution comes to mind. Things like that. That just
total asymmetric upside.
Yeah. These things might explode to the upside. And the last one we had was be transparent. So CMOs really need to be open about successes, failures. It kind of goes without saying, in order to build up trust with the CFO. I mean, the last thing I think you want is sort of this, the 2 positions are often have this creative tension where there's some, like, the CMO is going to try to drive the top line of the business. The CFO is going to watch costs. And I think the more open they both are about what worked and what didn't, I think the more likely they are to work together.
I think you're right. Well, and as marketers, we tend to have sort of rose-colored glasses on sometimes, and we want to present things in the most positive light. But just being transparent with the data, what this is working, this isn't working, here's what we learned, and here's what we're doing about that, continues to foster trust and credibility, so that the CFO isn't riding you on every detail because they feel like you've been open and transparent with them. Yeah.
So those are 3 or 4 ways that a CFO and a CMO can work really well together. It's critical now. I mean, in this era where it's like, it's no longer growth at all costs, especially for D2C brands. Like, you've got a cash flow, and that's how you're going to exit the business someday, or pay a nice dividend out. You get a nice lifestyle business if you're generating cash. And I think the key to unlock all that is the right CFO. And so it's really important for the CMO and the CFO to be on the same page. So I hope that helps. Email us with any more questions about this. All right, Mike, interesting audience question we got this week. which was how do you really scale direct mail for an apparel brand? So I was going through some of my catalogs that I get. I got to say, easily 70% are apparel, right? Me and M, you've just got, Coolie Bar. This is probably like 1 month's worth of catalogs. Frank and Eileen, Marine Layer. What's that? You too. Koyana. Right?
Yeah.
So it clearly works for these brands. These are big brands, Vuori, J. Crew, right? And they're all doing a catalog. So like, what allows them to scale up the channel such that it moves the needle for them? So they're like all convinced that direct mail is working, that it's driving a significant percentage of their revenue.
Yeah, and these are large brands, and they got that way by diversifying their channels and starting to build more customer acquisition channels outside of just Meta. And catalogs are a tried and true way for apparel brands to do it. So one way, I think, is being able to personalize the send. So really time this out based on specific cohorts, specific audiences of existing customers, and automate those sends so that you've just constantly got these evergreen campaigns going out in the background to existing customers based on what you know about them, what they bought recently, how much they spent, and things even about them as individuals, how much they make, whether they have kids in the house, what kind of beer they drink, whatever it might be. Being able to have those on triggered based on behavior and constantly running in the background is one way that these brands are scaling. They're not doing it just one and done, where they're just batch and blasting to a bunch of people at once. They're waiting 3 months to figure out what happened, and then they're doing it. They're starting that whole process again. They've got these things always on, and they're constantly layering on more touch points and more segments based on what they learned from these campaigns. What do you think, Drew?
When we look at these brands and these apparel brands and how they've been able to scale the channel, you and I have come up with 3 things they're all doing. Okay. The first, I think, is they embrace automation and personalization. So they don't think of this as like, we've got to drop a one-off catalog. They all think of this like Klaviyo or something similar, where if you think of like, you could build flows in Klaviyo until the cows come home, each one sort of iterating on the last one, and you could build that into a more and more complicated automated CRM, which really represents some intelligence on your business. And I think they do the same thing with direct mail. So these brands know the product category you bought from in the past, who's in your house, what do they like? Do they like the dresses or the sweaters? And so the biggest apparel brands we see doing a lot of personalization. If I buy from, the men's section at J. Crew, I'm going to get the men's catalog later on. They do a lot of automation. So, first time buyer gets this piece of direct mail. 20-time buyer gets this other piece of direct mail. Just like email, you can automate this. And the big benefit is, unlike email, you don't have to be opted in or subscribed to receive the piece of direct mail. So all these brands, I think, start with a couple core sequences. If I had to guess, some sort of new customer sequence, a win-back sequence, and they're automating those catalogs. And once they're catalogs and pieces of direct mail, and as they work, they're probably iterating and building more and more and more, getting more granular with the targeting. But every time, like, the overall number of sends just keeps going up, which they're happy with as long as it's got a positive ROI. The second way that these apparel brands are able to scale direct mail is to embrace multi-channel integration. So what do we mean by that, Mike?
Yeah, it's a little bit of the 1 and 1 = 3 scenario here, where a lot of brands, especially smaller, are really focused on deconflicting channels, where They don't ever want, to be sending an SMS or sending a postcard to somebody who they talked to an email 2 months ago. What the big brands are doing is they're learning how to orchestrate all of those channels and make them all work together so that they actually get greater scale and greater overall incremental revenue by coordinating these channels and multiple touch points. And so you might have, your Facebook, your meta ads running. That doesn't mean that you don't want to hit that person with a catalog or a direct mail piece. You want to create a cohesive strategy that ensures that you're creating memorable, consistent touch points with your best customers and prospects, particularly when they're not taking the action you expected them to take through your digital marketing efforts. And these brands at scale, again, like Vuori is still sending me emails and I'm still getting their catalogs. When you combine those two things, I am still buying more frequently from Vuori than I would if I only was getting their email or if I only was getting their catalog.
Yeah, and when I think of multi-channel integration too, I think of like the J. Crew catalog with Demi Moore on the cover, the most recent one. That creative was reflected on the site in a unique landing page that you hit when you scan the QR code that was in the catalog, right? It was reflected in their Facebook ads. And so there's just sort of like, they're stacking the deck in their favor with the same catalog, the same brand experience that you get, whether you get it in your inbox or your mailbox, and you end up on the site. And I think there's something about that where 1 + 1 really does equal 3. And you're going to see higher lifetime values, higher conversion rates from your customers if you do that.
Yeah, the J. Crew example is a really interesting one. And we can go down that rabbit hole for a second because they, years ago, the J. Crew catalog was iconic, right? Everybody had it. People were folding over the pages, circling the items they wanted. It was just an iconic thing that people looked forward to, and it was trend setting. And then they made the decision to sort of go all in on digital marketing, and J. Crew ultimately, I think, declared bankruptcy. And now they've actually turned the business around, and part of that turnaround, I won't say it's all due to them restarting the catalog, but they certainly recognized as part of this reinvigoration of the brand and turning that brand around that the catalog served a hugely important purpose for them. Not only did it keep the brand top of mind, but it was helping fuel the top of funnel. It was helping keep new customers coming in. And they realized that when they stripped that all out, they could only remarket to the same existing customers so many times. And if they weren't fueling the top of the funnel with this inspirational, editorialized content that was getting people aware of the brand and inspiring them to ultimately buy from them over time, efficiency might have gone up significantly when they cut the catalog, except they went to zero because they just stripped out.
Didn't have enough people going. Yeah, didn't have enough people going in the funnel in the first place.
Exactly.
I would love to get someone from J. Crew on who lived through that bankruptcy experience, because my hunch is like we see a lot of brands, they're encountering some financial hardship. They're like expanded too quickly, whatever they did. Maybe there's a new private equity owner. They immediately want to cut costs. They look at the P&L. There's like this big fat line item for catalog, and they cut it. And they're like, okay, we're cutting our marketing spend. We're getting more efficient. And instead they're looking at a snapshot and not a video of what actually happens when you acquire that customer from the catalog. And they end up, we've seen this 9 times out of 10, that people acquired through direct mail spend more often, have higher lifetime values. And so what essentially J. Crew did was they cut off that like whale segment. And not surprisingly, they go bankrupt, 6 months later. And so it was really interesting to see them bring it back. And, we wish them the best. And hopefully it just certainly sounds like the catalog's doing well. I mean, they've been out of stock of it. It's like they're giving it away in the showrooms also. And people love it. So hopefully it's driving more customer acquisition for them.
They are doing it smarter this time. Like they're not blasting it with as much frequency as they were in the early days to all the same people. They're being more targeted with the sends, but that makes sense. That's how you get efficient without sacrificing the channel.
And so the third thing we see all these apparel brands doing to really scale their direct mail channel is they all lean into acquisition with direct mail. And so we talk about retention all the time because we started a postcard retention platform, which now does everything. But like we started with retention. Retention almost always works, right? If you set up your win back correctly, it's always going to work. But, everybody wants acquisition, right? It's sort of like one of those iceberg things where you'd see, like, if you were to look at the spend of any one of these brands, the tip of the iceberg is on their postcard retargeting, and everything under the surface is on acquisition. And that's probably like what you need to do to keep the brand big and relevant and keep driving people into the stores.
Totally. So building audiences based on data. We have thousands of attributes on hundreds of millions of consumers. We've built like the most powerful data set for that specific purpose. So you can run acquisition campaigns using catalog or other piece of direct mail more like you would run a meta campaign. Who looks like my best buyer and who's likely to be in market for my products at any given time. But also they are just sending to these people who look like their best customers at regular intervals, even if they're not always getting a massive direct response ROI on every catalog that goes out to every person. Like, again, can't emphasize it enough because these brands have gotten big by understanding that not everything is going to be immediate direct response ROI, but how do you create meaningful, memorable touch points that still have positive ROI, especially over time, as you continue to roll these out with consistency and start to see results, continue to improve over time. Just like when you start with Meta, that's how they're getting to this level of scale.
Yeah, and one of the things we see when we look at the brands across various product categories and price points is that when they do acquisition, like the higher AOV products tend to do better. And so we're talking about scaling apparel today. And apparel is one of those categories, like furniture and a couple others where there are higher AOVs. So it's great for acquisition. In a catalog like this, a 6x9, you could feature 30, 40 of your SKUs really well. And it's not that expensive to get out there. And maybe the AOV for any one of these brands is over $100. I think it's perfect for acquisition. You create something that's sort of like a work of art. If I get it cold, I don't think I've ever bought from this brand before. It goes on the coffee table, it goes in the bathroom. You kind of flip through it, especially a catalog. I think it really appeals to me, like the Buck Mason one I flipped throughout the whole season. And you're going to see acquisition come eventually. Maybe it's not immediately, maybe it's like in a week or in 3 weeks after the catalog's dropped. But that's kind of what's compelling and unique about a direct mail acquisition campaign.
Yep. And it's now cheaper than a Facebook click to get a whole catalog out into someone's hands.
Sure. It's like you rarely take the time when you're on Facebook to kind of flip through someone's entire product catalog, right? I don't even know how you do that. So direct mail for apparel. You can scale it, can get big. These are just three of the things we've seen the brands that have scaled it successfully really do. They lean into automation, they go multi-channel, and then they really embrace acquisition.